He walked onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent wearing a borrowed suit and carrying 10 years of rejection on his back. Then he sang one Prince song, and suddenly the entire country knew his name. But the real story behind that golden buzzer moment is far stranger than the 4 minutes people saw on television. Because long before the confetti fell, before Simon Cowell stood up in shock, before the standing ovation and viral clips, Mattie Junosa had already spent years losing. And what happened to him before Britain's Got Talent almost destroyed his dream completely? On March 28, 2026, a 27-year-old Filipino singer stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage and changed his life in less than 5 minutes. The audience had no idea who he was. Simon Cowell didn't know him. Amanda Holden, Alicia Dixon, and Bruno Tonioli were expecting another nervous contestant with a sad backstory and a safe karaoke song. Instead, they got a man who had already failed once on national television. A man who had already watched a music career collapse in front of millions. A man who had spent 2 years carrying plates in Glasgow while secretly preparing for one more chance. And here's the part almost nobody knew. The song he chose that night was not random. Before he sang a single note, Mattie admitted something painful. He told the judges he had spent years believing he was destined to lose every singing competition he entered. He said it calmly, almost casually, like someone who had repeated the thought in his head so many times it no longer hurt. The judges smiled politely. They had heard stories like this before. But then the music started. The opening notes of Purple Rain filled the theater, and suddenly the room changed. People stopped moving. By the second verse, audience members in the front rows were already standing without realizing it. Then Mattie reached the final stretch of the song, the massive emotional climax Prince used to shake entire arenas. And before the final note even ended, Simon Cowell slammed his hand onto the golden buzzer. Gold confetti exploded across the stage. The audience lost their minds. Mattie just stood there frozen, both hands on his head, looking like he had forgotten how to breathe. He became the first golden buzzer act of the season. But what nobody watching at home realized was that he had been preparing for that exact moment for almost a decade. Long before London, before the stage lights and viral clips, Mattie Junosa was just a kid constantly moving from one place to another in the Philippines. He was born in Quezon City, but his childhood took him through Mandaluyong, Zamboanga, Tawi-Tawi, Cavite, and Taguig before he even reached high school. Most people skip over that detail. But it mattered. Tawi-Tawi sits at the southern edge of the Philippines, far from Manila and far from the entertainment industry. Growing up in so many different places made Mattie feel like he belonged everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But through every move, one thing stayed constant. His voice. He had been singing since he was 5 years old. At school, he joined choirs, entered competitions, and performed whenever he could. Friends remembered him as the kid who would randomly start singing in hallways between classes just to keep practicing. Music slowly stopped becoming a hobby and started becoming his identity. After high school, he enrolled at De La Salle University and joined one of the school's top vocal groups. For the first time, he experienced what it felt like to stand in front of a serious audience on a serious stage. And after graduating in 2018, he reached the same crossroads many young artists face. Safe career or impossible dream. He chose the dream. Within a year, that choice brought him onto the audition stage of Idol Philippines. At 20 years old, standing under bright studio lights, Mattie truly believed this was finally going to be his breakthrough. He made it all the way to the top 12 live shows. Everything he had worked toward since childhood suddenly felt close enough to touch. And then everything fell apart. The first live round required contestants to perform songs by legendary Filipino composer Ryan Cayabyab. The voting system combined scores from judges and viewers at home. Talent mattered. But popularity mattered just as much. And Mattie had no fan army.
No viral moment.
No huge online following. When the results came in, he received the lowest combined score in the entire competition. 50.5%. Dead last. Just like that, he became the first contestant eliminated from the top 12. While future winner Zephany Dimaranan stayed behind under the stage lights, Mattie packed his things and walked out. In interviews afterward, he tried to stay positive. He said he had no regrets. But the expression on his face told a different story. He genuinely believed his music career had ended before it had even started. But here's where the story takes a strange turn. Only weeks after eliminating him, the same network that sent him home decided to bring him back. Producers grouped him together with 2 other contestants, Lucas Garcia, and Enzo Almario, creating a vocal trio called Idols. For someone who had just been humiliated on national television, it felt like an unexpected second chance. The trio started appearing on Filipino variety shows, building a loyal fan base and slowly creating real momentum. In 2020, all three members released solo music under a major label. Mattie's song, Sa'yo Ene Talaga, became his first official release as a solo artist. And after spending a year feeling like the weakest contestant in Idol Philippines, hearing his own name attached to a real song felt life-changing. The group kept growing. Television appearances, live performances, more fans. It finally looked like Mattie had survived the worst part of his story. Then something happened almost nobody outside the Philippines knows about. In 2021, Idols released a song called Kapangyarihan. At first, it was simply another single. But later, that same track was chosen as the final lip-sync song for the season finale of Drag Race Philippines, one of the biggest entertainment shows in Southeast Asia. Think about how strange that is. The same singer who had ranked dead last in Idol Philippines suddenly had his voice attached to one of the biggest pop culture moments in the region. Across the Philippines, people who never knew his name before were suddenly hearing his voice everywhere. And right when things finally started working, Mattie made a decision that shocked almost everyone around him. He walked away. In 2022, Idols officially disbanded because Mattie accepted a partial scholarship to study musical theatre at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. Fans thought he was crazy. He was leaving behind television exposure, a growing fan base, and a real music career in the Philippines to move halfway across the world to a rainy city where almost nobody knew his name. But to Mattie, it felt necessary. He later admitted that after Idol Philippines, a voice inside his head kept telling him he would always be the loser of every competition he entered. The only way to silence that voice was to completely rebuild himself from scratch. So he moved to Glasgow. And life there was nothing like television. He arrived with only a partially funded scholarship and expenses he couldn't fully cover. To survive, he worked as a waiter while balancing acting classes, dance rehearsals, vocal coaching, and theatre performances. Everything felt unfamiliar. The weather, the accents, the loneliness. Most days, he was the only Filipino student in the room. And underneath all of it sat one terrifying thought. If he failed, he would have nothing to return to. Still, he kept going. He auditioned for every theatre role he could. Slowly, his confidence returned. By the time he graduated in 2024, he had already performed in productions like Kinky Boots and The Hunchback of Notre Dame and appeared at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. He built a theatre resume many performers spend years chasing. Then graduation arrived. And after all that work, all that sacrifice, all those years rebuilding himself, he went straight back to waiting tables. Because that is what most struggling performers actually do. But during that difficult period, something changed in the way Mattie thought about success. Somewhere between long restaurant shifts and theatre rehearsals, he stopped thinking like a hopeful contestant and started thinking strategically. When he decided to audition for Britain's Got Talent, he didn't just pick a random song and hope for the best. He studied Simon Cowell obsessively. He watched old interviews, old auditions, old judging clips. He wanted to understand what genuinely moved Simon emotionally. And eventually, he discovered something important. One of Simon Cowell's favorite songs of all time was Purple Rain. That was the moment the entire plan came together. This was no longer just a singer chasing another audition. This was someone who had spent years learning from failure. Someone who understood television, understood emotion, understood timing. Mattie chose Purple Rain very deliberately. He knew the song could not just impress Simon. It could reach him personally. And when audition day finally arrived, Mattie executed the performance exactly the way he imagined it. He held back at the beginning, keeping his voice soft and almost fragile. Then slowly, he opened up emotionally until the final moments exploded across the theatre. The audience rose to their feet before the song even finished. All four judges stood up. And Simon Cowell, completely unaware that the song had been chosen specifically for him, hit the golden buzzer. But what happened after the audition aired was even more emotional. Within hours, the clip spread across Filipino social media like wildfire. News outlets picked it up immediately. People who had voted him off Idol Philippines years earlier started reposting the performance with apology messages attached. Fans of Idols shared old clips beside the golden buzzer moment. Viewers from Drag Race Philippines suddenly realized the singer they had been listening to for years was standing on one of the biggest stages in Britain. Across hospitals, construction sites, restaurants, and overseas worker communities around the world, Filipinos shared the clip through group chats and video calls faster than most British viewers could even understand. Because to many of them, Mattie's story felt personal. A young Filipino man leaving home, failing publicly, starting over repeatedly, working impossible jobs while chasing something uncertain, carrying rejection for years without giving up. That story was bigger than television now. And the pressure only keeps growing. The Britain's Got Talent semi-finals are approaching, and Mattie has already hinted that his next performance will sound completely different. Bigger, stronger, more powerful. He knows people are waiting to see whether the golden buzzer was real or just one perfect moment. But the truth is, pressure is nothing new to him. He has already survived the kind of setbacks that end most careers before they begin. He lost on national television, watched a record deal disappear, left behind a rising group career, moved across the world, worked restaurant shifts after graduating from one of the best performing art schools in Europe. And every single time life knocked him down, he rebuilt himself again. That may be the most important part of this entire story. At his lowest point, Mattie carried more than 240 pounds physically and emotionally. He finished last in a national competition. He spent years wondering whether he simply was not enough. But quietly, piece by piece, he rebuilt his confidence, his body, his voice, and his identity. Again and again. And now, for the first time in his life, it feels like the world is finally catching up to the person he spent years becoming. Which leaves only one question. How far is he willing to go now that the spotlight is finally his? So what do you think happens next for Mattie Junosa once those live semi-finals begin? Drop your prediction in the comments below and let us know if you believe he has what it takes to win the entire season.